calling the meeting to order at 6:38. And if you please take roll call.
Absolutely. All right. Alexander Dukeman.
Here.
Matt Crabtree.
Here.
Melinda Ellswick.
Here.
Ben Woodward.
Here.
Samantha Hurst.
Here.
Cash Parker. Currently absent. Ken Chu.
Here.
Okay. And for staff, there's Eric Sampson and Brian Ison.
Cool. Starting with the approval of the minutes. And it's been a little while since I've done this here, so I'm trying to remember the proper process, but I would basically call, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion approved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Is there any discussion or changes to the minutes? Okay. I guess we wouldn't vote on the minutes now. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, and that was an aye from you, Melinda?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Great. It is amazing that that was September from those minutes. It's been a while. So, public forum, we have a guest here tonight. You're welcome to speak if you'd like to. If you'd just like to listen in, you're welcome to do so also.
Very good.
Thank you for coming. I think you're the first guest we've had, probably. Maybe not ever. We've had a couple of guests. I guess folks from Aurora come to talk this room there during presentation. It's good to have you here. So thank you for coming. If you have any questions, just let us know. Moving on to number 4, and I'll probably have to hand it over to you for this one because I'm currently the chair, and that is election of chair and vice chair.
Okay. So this is the part where if somebody has any recommendations or would like to serve as HPC chair, now's the time for nominations. You can vote.
Okay. I'm currently chair. I don't know if I can be it again, but
I think you're eligible for
one more year.
We discussed this last year.
I know.
The same thing. Yeah, I think that's what I recall, that you'd be eligible one more time.
So, unless somebody really, really wants it. If anybody really, really wants it. Ken, you want to be chair?
All you. I'm nominating you.
Oh, well, I appreciate that.
You're
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Jim. Anybody else interested in being chair? Okay.
How about vice chair?
Is this one of those moments where Cash isn't here, so we just reappoint him as chair?
Honestly, that does happen more often than not. You can probably ask Mr. Woodward down there. If you're not here, you kind of get picked on and end up being the vice chair.
You get jobs that you don't know what they are.
It's one of those situations everybody not interested step forward and those not paying attention.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we'll kind of go around the table again here. Anybody sure they don't want to be chair?
Sure.
I'm sure.
Okay, Jim? Okay.
Sure.
Okay, so I guess I'm happy to continue the role of chair.
Okay, we're gonna keep Cash as vice chair.
Cash is a great vice chair.
He's a great vice chair.
All right, somebody want to make a motion?
I will make a motion to nominate Cash as vice chair.
And then basically just a motion to improve chair and vice chair.
So
All together.
I'll make a motion to approve the chair, Matt Crabtree as the chair, and Cash Parker as the vice chair.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay. Thanks. All right, all in favor? I'll just go ahead and do roll call. Alexandra,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Melinda,
Aye.
Tim,
Aye.
Samantha,
Aye.
and Cash is there, and Ken.
Aye.
Okay.
Yay. All right, cool. Moving on to the next agenda item, conservation overlay study session. Did everybody have an opportunity? There's a lot of good information actually in the contained documents here. Did folks have a chance? We can also work through it too if you haven't had a chance to read it over. So I think I'll let maybe Eric start with maybe background on this to give us a little bit more context associated with what this is and why it's come to our board.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. That's, yeah, because he's been there for the council and the planning and zoning commission. So it's,
When Code Next was being adopted in 2023, we had a group of folks from Arapahoe Acres neighborhood that started questioning. They talked about going through the historic preservation or historic district designation process, but wanted to know if there were other options out there. We looked at other cities such as Denver have what's called a conservation overlay district or process that it works on preservation the same way that historic, well, its end game is very similar to historic preservation, but the way it gets there is very different. So historic preservation, in a nutshell, if you designate a property or a district, things generally try to stay as much as is as possible. If they start to make changes, they have to come back to the Historic Preservation Commission and City Council to, in short, ask for permission to make those changes, especially if it's going to be something that is going to be completely against the character of that district and why it was designated. Conservation overlay districts are a little bit focused more on the development standards. So a lot of times you'll see them used to preserve certain architectural characteristics. So in the Arapahoe Acres, that's a mid-century modern neighborhood, and that's their discussion is they want to preserve that architectural style so that somebody doesn't tear down a home and build a very large home that looks absolutely nothing like anything else in their neighborhood. So that's their end game, is to try to preserve their neighborhood that way. What the city has to do is to create that process. It would have to create a process that way anyone in the city could actually request this type of district. And so we went to council in January, talked to city council about whether they wanted us to pursue this option, and they said yes. But they do want a lot of input from themselves to be on how we set those characteristics to make this kind of a request. We went to the Planning and Zoning Commission a couple weeks ago, and the commission really is hesitant with this type of district in looking at it, because in different cities, they do different things. Some cities have used it to, like if you have an area that the minimum lot size is 7,000 square feet, but the homes are developed on 10 to 12,000 square foot lots, they use conservation overlay districts to say you can't build anything smaller than a 10,000 square foot. Planning Commission does not feel like that's appropriate. They used it to limit, not really land uses, but they can limit like the size of a house. Like if your homes out here are 6,000 square feet minimum for homes, you could tell somebody you're going to build a new one, it has to be 6,000 square feet if you get this district adopted. You're really kind of setting your own development standards for whatever area is designated, which the Planning Commission, members of the Planning Commission feel like that could be used almost adversarially or used to really limit what they have pushed with Code Next, which was, increasing density in these minor ways, but not going above and beyond and saying that someone could like prohibit ADUs, which you can't do through this, but that's one thing that they want to ensure, that you're not prohibiting ADUs or you're not minimizing what's allowed by code. So that kind of was their guidance for us to talk to council about, was to say, if we go through this process, don't let this undermine what the code already allows. So if the code already allows X, just let this kind of go above it. Like in areas where I know a couple streets, we have homes that are turned at these odd angles compared to the rest of the houses, right? They're okay with things like that, as long as it's not, pulling the house closer to the street or pushing it closer to the side setback than it should be. So that's kind of the guidance we got from them. So what we're asking you all is not necessarily what standards do we want to set and criteria, but we start with this list of questions and say, what kind of input do you have for council? What does council need to think about from your perspective, like where do they need to go? Because we want to take these perspectives. You know, the planning commission, they have their perspective on things. The HPC has their perspective on what their goals and what they're trying to achieve. So we're trying to get both of those together and take it to city council. So that city council, when they're listening to this information, they can kind of mold that with their decisions on how they feel like if this process should move forward, and if so, what should it look like? I know that's a whole lot in a very short amount of time. And we can answer any questions about like what the districts do. Most of the time, they're focused on architectural characteristics, like how tall your house can be, or you know, some places have done it where typically you have 5-foot setbacks on either side of your house, right? Some places have been developed where they have 7 and 3, so you have 7 on one side and 3 on the next. Well, the next house has 7 on its side, so you're always 10 feet away from each other, but they're just aligned a little bit different. Or one of the things that we pointed out, I think on Lincoln and Grant, there's a couple stretches where you have these really cool front steps that go up from the street and then back. In short, somebody, if they wanted to, I don't know how feasible it would be, but they could scrape all that and just build a house right in the middle. You know, put up some retaining walls on the side, and then you lose those cool steps. So what you would use this district to preserve characteristics that we wouldn't in other ways be able to preserve without going the historic route. This is more just focused on, you know, site design or structure design. Generally, most cities have building permits and stuff reviewed by staff rather than going to a board or commission. Some cities have it set up where each time you designate a district, you get to determine what route it takes as well. So sometimes they'll say this route, this district is kind of minimal, we'll do staff approval. This district, we're going to set up a neighborhood board that has to review these permits before they get approved by city staff. So it looks really different all over the place. It really does. But I think the biggest questions are, is this something that the city should take on? And if so, what should we be thinking about as we do this?
Okay. I have one question, and I don't want to monopolize the first part of this conversation because it'd be kind of cool to go around the room and get everybody's perspective on this. But, and I might actually rely upon Jim's history and memory here also. Do you remember right around circa 2012, 2013, 2014, a overlay that was done on Grant Street of Dartmouth?
The neighborhood preservation overlay.
That was probably when you were on council. And I remember the discussions regarding that. It was about 2 or 3 block area. How is that recorded right now?
Right now, it's just an amendment in Title 16. So it didn't really follow any specified process other than a text amendment to the code. They had neighborhood meetings, they had other things. What we're trying to do is say, this should have a spelled out process in the code, like everything else that we do. So we've been asked that question, like, why did that one go that way? We don't know.
I remember it. And I think
I know
Jim, if
there's a
you
lot of input.
I don't remember it specifically.
Okay.
But that's the area you lived in there.
I lived further down, further
Further
north,
down.
about 3 blocks north of there. But I remember the discussions that were happening regarding that. And the intent of that preservation overlay was to prevent high density residential.
To prevent,
High density residential.
okay,
That was, as I remember, the intent of that. And I mean, it was successful. It was put in the code. How does that, I guess, differ from what we're talking about here? Because that seems like the same thing, but different.
Yeah, kind of. So from the perspective of the planning commission, that's not something that they want because it's limiting density. So
Right.
they're looking at it more on the architectural side. So, you know, if every house on that street had a 90 square foot front porch, that could be considered a characteristic. Any new home would have to have this large front porch. Or in one neighborhood in Denver, they use it to distinguish where ADUs can be located on the lot. Like they all have to be put in this back corner or something along those lines. The process, we've talked about going back through how that process and what they did to create that district. Ultimately, it would end up being something very similar. Because what would happen is you'd have a map amendment that identifies the area of the overlay district, and then you would have a text amendment that would go in the code. The only difference here is that we need to set up in the code how this stuff should happen every single time, rather than it being just well, we did it this way this time, we're gonna do it this way this time, do it that way this time. We wanna make sure that it's done the exact same way every single time if we choose to do this, just like any other process that we have. We've got to set our criteria out.
Well, if we want to go around the room here and kind of get everybody's opinion on what this is and maybe what this could be.
Yeah, I read through it, and I think like one of the things that occurred to me was I think there's something about anyone would be able to like bring forward a motion to designate an area or something like that. Is that right? Or
So in the stuff that we've looked at, it's usually a percentage of a
sure
area. So like there's a lot of the codes that we looked at set up a minimum either acreage, a certain percentage of development that has to be in place, and also age. And this varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I remember one that's like the structures had to be at least 40 plus years old, one was 50. So it really varies from place to place. And it also differs a lot in sizes. One community has a minimum size requirement of 3 adjacent properties in the same block. Other ones are the entire block face. And then also, there's also a percentage of property owners that need to sign off or be in support of the conservation district. And usually we see about 65%.
But generally, it's one of the property owners that initiates the application. And then during the submittal process, you have to provide documentation that you have approval from a certain percentage of remaining property owners. And one of the things that council had mentioned, and one of the cities does this, is say you go through this whole process, 5 of you agree, and we start going through the process. We do all of our neighborhood meetings, we do all these things, and we decide that the most important thing to conserve in your district are the window sizes. And then we're getting ready to go back to council and the planning and zoning commission or whatever groups are going to do the approval. And Jim and Ken have now decided the windows are not my thing. I would rather save the front porches. I don't agree with this anymore. So there was a discussion about should there be a second round of voting or signatures from members in that area or property owners in that area to say, well, not only I agreed in the beginning, but also do I agree now that we're 90% of the way there and we now have to go to council for this approval, but now do I actually agree with where we're going? And so that's been a discussion too, is maybe we should look at 2 rounds of, signatures from the property owners to determine whether, I started the process and I agree, but now that I'm halfway there, 3/4 of the way there, I don't think where this is going. I want out. So that's been a discussion on how much input or how many times they should have to authorize. Do I want to do this? How far am I willing to go? Things like that.
yes, I think like things for consideration are like that would be prudent, right, to ensure community engagement and involvement in all those decision-making points. I think, I was thinking in terms of like for our ordinance approval of like historic districts, we set a bar for what percentage of the residents need to be on board. And I would hope that there's alignment between these so that, there wasn't an advantage to go in one direction or another, and that wasn't the determining factor, right? It wasn't like you could get less resident engagement in order to go either route. So hopefully there'd be some alignment there. And then of course, we spent a good amount of the summer attending a lot of these neighborhood things, and I have to say I was surprised at how many people when we talked about historic preservation, how many people asked if designation meant that we controlled anything that they could do in their property. People were pretty concerned about like, other people designating their properties as historic, and we clarified that that's not how our ordinance is written in the city of Englewood. And so, just to that question of like who can actually make the proposal, and I know you say, Brian, that usually comes from a resident in the community, but to think carefully on whether or not it even would be allowable for someone not in the community to bring that motion, because then there was that thing that happened in Denver where somebody was trying to sell their house and somebody else was blocking the sale of the house by designating the property as historic property, which kind of then caused the owner to lose a ton of money because they couldn't sell the house because of this motion, right? And so I think those are the things that like just came to mind as I was reading through this.
Okay. Jen, what do you think about this?
I start thinking, for example, I don't know if this even relates, but for example, our avenues are a little different than streets and setbacks and that sort of thing. So I assume if somebody had like a corner house on an avenue and that house was demolished or whatever, and somebody wanted to put it up, instead of having the frontage on the street, on the avenue, the setbacks would be probably entirely different and stuff. And would that be under that overlay then? Or would you have to, how would you do that?
So if somebody wanted to orient their home to the side street rather than the typical, so the way our code reads is that you have to orient your home to the long side of the block. Unless you're in certain circumstances, you're allowed to orient to the short side. And it's generally only
stuff north of Bellevue Park, which seemed to have frontage, I recall, on the avenue side.
There's some circumstances so in Code Next, there was included every district kind of got like a bonus on the corner, right? So single family, R1 through R1A, B, and C are able to subdivide the rear third. That back third can front on that short side of the lot. In the R2 districts, I think there's some allowances for attached homes, like townhomes, to be able to front onto that side of the lot. But just a typical single family home is required to front onto the long side of the street. We do have some administrative adjustments that can be done. I don't know specifically about that one. But there are mechanisms. There would be a mechanism for a variance if they wanted to request a variance. But
Looking at the questions here up there, is there anything that stands out to you, Jen?
I think neighborhood meetings should be a requirement.
and these questions we pulled out of just researching different ordinances from the country and across the state, saying, what do we see in common in all of these? These 6 or 7, 8 things kind of kept popping up. They're not always in every single one, but they're in, there may be 5 in one, and 3 in this other one, and 6 in this one, but they're kind of the consistent things that you can see pop up out of this side.
We can come back to you too, Jim, if you want to keep going around the room. If you want to think about it a little bit. You want to think about it a little bit? We can kind of continue around
Yeah, I'm thinking are minimum size requirements appropriate? Yes. Are minimum development standards appropriate? It's probably subject to change again. Yeah. Who's required that? People authorities will, I guess the planning.
Okay,
there.
sure. Anyone around the room?
Is this, I guess, are these districts intended to be like permanent?
Yes, if they're adopted, they're permanent until somebody vacates it. It's essentially a zoning overlay district. So you
Okay.
take your base zoning and you would apply this on top of it.
So even if like all the property owners have all changed over, like this still has unless it. Okay.
Until all the property owners got back together and then went to council and said, oh, we don't want this anymore, we need to vacate this. It would generally, the way our zoning processes work, it would have to go through the exact same process to go back and vacate it, unless there was a different process created.
Okay. I like Jim mentioned, I like the idea of neighborhood meetings. I just feel like there should be guidelines on like who, like somebody who's not gonna be in this district I don't think they should have some outsized opinion and just be able to take over the meeting when it's, I mean, yes, you look at these properties all the time, but I feel like I've been to meetings where one side is just absolutely tearing apart the other, and it's not nice, it's not fun, and I think everybody's should, like, that actually has a vested interest. Like the meeting I have in mind particularly was a public park, so everybody's opinion was important, but when it's somebody's private property, I think it's a little different.
Anything else?
No,
With that, could you send us footage from the property, the subject property, or, block south, block north, block east and west for the neighborhood meeting?
yeah, I mean, I think there's
I mean,
a lot
something
of
like that
parameters. You
Seemed to
could-
make sense to me,
Yeah,
because I understand saying
Would you say,
objects.
so our current code for a zoning change request is 1,000 feet from the
Okay.
property line out.
it's like a radius.
So is that ballpark? Do y'all think it should be less, more?
I mean, if you're talking about a district, you're basically looking at 1,000 feet surrounding that imaginary dotted line of sorts. So 1,000 feet. Trying to think.
Feet is what, a block, about a block?
Yeah.
Is that,
Yeah, sure.
Because I'd say a block would be 125 feet plus alley plus another 125 feet. So
That way,
250 feet short side. Long side probably closer to 600, I would think. So you'd end up 250 plus like a ballpark of 52 to 60 foot right away. You can end up with like 3 blocks deep to 4 blocks deep.
Okay.
Pretty easily.
Maybe it could be a function of the size of the district too. Because if it's like a half block, but you want the opinion of 3 blocks in each direction, that's
Ratio
kind of
of the
wild.
size,
Yeah.
And to further quantify that, I guess, are you implying that it would, I mean, people could show up from wherever, right?
Yeah.
But the actual vote count and or the input could only be from people in the affected area?
Maybe like the weighted input.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking.
Anybody can speak, but like the weighted
Yeah.
input.
Yeah, the weighted input, yeah, that's obviously the challenge with any kind of public,
Yeah.
meeting or involvement is everybody kind of has an opinion on things and, yeah, but, so how is that handled now with this I mean, obviously with our ordinance, with the voting, you only vote if you're in the district, right?
So what they would do now, and they would end up filing some kind of a petition that says, here are all the property owners, so you get a list. Somebody would have to go to Arapahoe County, say, here's the list of all the people that live in the district. If you have 10 people on a deed, all 10 people, like, we need all the people that own a house. So if it's 2 people that own one house, they could split their vote, right?
That's
And
right.
then they basically cancel themselves out. Or they can both vote for it or against it. But every property owner, out of every property owner, if there's 60 lots, but there's 100 owners, we would need whatever percentage of those owners, right? 65% of those owners to sign a petition to designate a district. And then I think for here, it goes through you all and then to council. It doesn't go to planning and zoning commission.
Right.
If one is designated, we would likely put it in Title 16. We would have to talk to the attorneys on where it would go in there. Just because it's going to be a zoning. Well, I guess that's a discussion we can have when we get there. It could live, the ordinance could live outside of everything. We found out in the last 6 to 8 months that, and I don't know, I wasn't here through a lot of the discussion, but there were 3 properties that were designated as historic in Eaglewood in the early 2000s. So way before we had any teeth in the ordinance on what you could do afterwards. So now we're working with the attorney's office on what does that mean for those 3 lots? Like, does it mean that they're just ceremonial and they have access to grants? Because that's kind of what it sounded like they were working for, is having those properties be able to get grants. But now that this has been adopted, now we're looking at it. Does that mean these 3 lots now have to go through this process if they're trying to make changes? So we're working with the attorney's office on that one. And then, but those ordinances and resolutions live outside of Title 16. So we could do it either way. They could live outside of it, or we could have another chapter in Title 16 that would encompass, like, historic designations and overlay district designations.
Is there any example of us voting or having basically community development initiating a vote like that? Is there an example of that happening? I mean, probably happened actually with the thing on Grant Street, with the preservation overlay on Grant Street back then. I would imagine that would have been a vote, not knowing the context, I suppose, of how that all happened.
Yeah, that one, I don't know how it happened. We can go back and look. Most of the time, if we're doing a Title 16 amendment, the requests come from council to go in and look at some kind of code change.
Okay. But getting to that point from the neighborhood perspective, because I think that's kind of an important part of this is, as I was reading this, it seemed that there was the conversation. It was almost like a comparison between the historic preservation ordinance and then this as being kind of apples to apples, just different. We require a vote. I would hope that there'd be a vote to Ken's point.
So like
I
if
hope
somebody
there'd
was
be a vote
designating a district,
designating a district.
if they were, so the first half of this is just creating the process, meaning we have to go through Title 16 amendment process. That's at least 4 months for adoption, plus all this work ahead of time to say what the criteria are. Then if somebody wanted to designate a district, it would essentially be half zoning amendment, half text change to our code. So we'd have 2 more sets of public hearings. There would be, the way other cities have it set up, there's multiple neighborhood meetings to talk about how you set the criteria for the district. There'd be votes depending on how it's set up, whether they have to go through this group or they for sure have to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council because there's zoning map amendments and development code changes. So those must happen. But you could set it up to where the Historic Preservation Commission could have a recommendation route as part of this whole process. It runs the game. Like I said, so if somebody were to do that, yeah, there'd be multiple votes along the way, just like a regular Title 16 or map.
Not necessarily a vote from the city council perspective, from the community perspective, those involved.
That's the other half of it. In order to submit the application, they would have to have that petition saying, we all agree to go through this process together.
And the petition is the actual vote.
That would be their counted as their vote as we go through this together. And now one of the, I think Councilmember Prang brought up, should we have that second vote later that says, yep, I still agree with everything. And that's,
Sure.
We found, I think, 1 or 2 cities that do that
Interesting.
out of the ones that we found where
So-
they have a second round.
That kind of solves a little bit of the weighted input, not necessarily from the public meeting perspective, because obviously public meetings are public and everybody has the right to speak at them. But maybe that addresses a little bit of your concern with the weighted actual impact of it, or
Like with the petition.
with the petition.
Yeah, and I kind of like the idea of the vote later, or at least exploring that idea. I know it's, I know a lot of times, like they say, like midterms get fewer voters and like off-cycle elections get fewer voters.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. Like there's that concern, but it is nice to be like, okay, I signed this petition, but now that I've looked into it more, I've thought about it more, like you said, I don't know if I still agree with it.
It's cool. Yeah, good idea. I like that.
Well, yeah, especially after neighborhood meetings, things. tend to
Yeah, I
change.
never thought of that.
Yeah. So,
And neighborhood meetings and should neighborhood meetings be a requirement? I think what we're hearing here, and I very much agree with that, is that should absolutely be a requirement. And to your point is that, sometimes in neighborhood meetings, that's where the new ideas kind of come about, or people change their perspective based upon those.
And I like what you said, Brian, earlier about the review process as well, whether or not this body needs to be involved in that, because it seems like, I don't know, a few months ago, you had brought forward, was it code 106 or something?
Oh, section 106.
Section 106.
Yeah.
Somebody had sent some things for us to consider review. Like it seemed like if we were gonna align with like federal guidance and things like that, that this body would kind of have a milestone step in that process, right?
Are you asking me a question?
I mean, I guess I'm just like ruminating that, and it makes sense that it would kind of, I mean, I know that's federal guidance, but
Yeah.
it would still kind of align with that process a little if, something to consider to build that into it.
And in certain communities, the conservation overlay policies and procedures lie within the historic preservation policy and procedures. They're all under one umbrella. Some cities, they're separated. Some cities, and I think some people like them to be separated because some people just want to get a building permit. It's only reviewed by staff. Nobody else gets to tell me what to do. Because private property, I don't know, this is what we do for a living, so we get to hear about it a lot. But private property rights are a big thing for people. And some people don't like it when other people tell them what to do. Unfortunately, that's kind of what we do, is tell people what they can and cannot do on their property. So that's one that people have brought up on numerous occasions.
Do you have a minute?
Yeah, so high level, again, city council is looking for just right now feedback from both this group, and they've already basically heard from planning and zoning.
Not yet. So they heard this from us in January. We went to P&Z earlier this month and just kind of asked them very broad questions. So the way council works is we went there in January. We couldn't get another meeting with council until middle of March because they're booked solid. We couldn't get another study session for a few months. So for us, instead of just sitting there and not working on it, we wanted to come to other boards and say, hey, what should council think about from your perspective? From the Planning and Zoning Commission perspective, what should they think about? From the Historic Preservation Commission perspective, what should they be thinking about? Because you guys have totally different roles in this organization and within the city. So to me, it's important to get everybody's opinion before we take it back to council and say, okay, now as the overarching body over all of us, here's what everybody else is thinking about when they're looking at this. So we didn't necessarily get direction to come to you all, but we wanted to come to you all
Okay,
to ask you these questions.
that's helpful. But not only it's also if this overlay should exist, and if it exists, what should it look like? Right, that's both
That's what
questions.
council is kind of working through. Council members had decided that they want a lot of input on where this goes. So if you watch the council meeting from January, I think some council members mentioned it's already kind of divisive in that neighborhood. There have been folks that have wanted that neighborhood to go through historic preservation. There's some folks that want it to go through here, and there's some folks that don't want to do any of it. And so it's very divisive in that neighborhood, and that's kind of coming out at those council meetings, is that not everybody agrees. So that's why council is really looking at this very, very closely. As we move forward.
Gut reaction to it is more concern than
Okay.
anything else.
Sure.
Just the whole idea of an overlay like that it feels like a level of complexity that I don't know if that's appropriate for a city the size of Inglewood, but also I have good property concerns. I'd personally be concerned if my entire block, and I'm the only one who doesn't want an overlay, I'm still overruled. It's not realistic to have unanimous decisions, but I would hope if an overlay existed, the bar for that would be pretty high. I think that's my main takeaway is I want the bar for that to exist to be pretty high, both about like who gets to create the first petition and input around that, who votes for it. But yeah, I would like our commission to have,
Authority.
if it existed,
Yeah.
I would want us to review it. Yeah, of course.
Totally.
Because I feel like there's a lot of
What's an
unintended
overlay?
overlay there.
Well,
with
especially this is
decisions.
intended to be like something in parallel but different from the historic preservation. Like, is it supposed to be easier? Like, what is Arapahoe Acres? I think is always like, what is the goal that is being pursued with this? Like,
So to jump in here, I think full disclosure, it is Arapahoe Acres pretty much. I think that's what they're talking about here, right?
That's the neighborhood that has chosen to lead the effort, or said, they're the group that wants this type of process. The way we look at it is we take the neighborhood out because we're looking citywide at everybody, but that is the neighborhood.
Yeah.
The genesis came out of the Arapahoe.
And we probably don't want to weight this discussion based upon that entirely because it could happen anywhere in the city.
It could happen anywhere in the city.
However, it is Arapahoe Acres and, so, and I think after that meeting, I just was there and I think I talked to Lee a little bit. I'm like, hey, we've got this historic preservation, ordinance and we could do this that way and this is the way it works. And she said, yeah, I looked into that. And then, that's pretty much where the conversation went. Very nice lady. I understand that, this is probably very important to them. And I think this kind of spells out another thing that's happening is I think there may be some fear associated, like what you mentioned, with historic designation. And this maybe is another way to do it, but I don't know. I mean, to your point, this seems very parallel to what the historic preservation ordinance does. It's just that maybe a different way of explaining it,
yeah.
maybe slightly different guidelines. I don't know. It just seems very parallel to what we
Like, I feel
currently
like it's
have.
a way to conserve other things that aren't necessarily
Historic.
historic, but if like Arapahoe Acres is trying to preserve their historic
Right.
architectural neighborhood,
Yeah.
like
So like
why?
if you had an area, we'll go back to Grant and Lincoln where we have those stairs. Is there anything historic about those stairs in front of people's homes? Probably not. They're not necessarily like Arapahoe Acres, developed as one unified, housing type and, architectural type. This other area probably may not meet the criteria to be designated. So that's what one route is if it doesn't meet criteria to get historic designation, here's another way to do it. What I look at it is almost like historic designation light. So a lot of times it's written to where groups like HBC, there's no public meetings once the district is adopted. If somebody comes in to apply for a building permit, it's reviewed by staff. Staff says, yep, it meets the criteria of the district, it's approved. And they don't have to go public hearing rounds afterwards. That's honestly a lot of why people like districts like this is because there's no additional oversight after the fact.
So we could have oversight and improve the district.
But yes, it could be. And you could also, some areas, I think it was Nashville has a lot more input from their commission on districts like this. Most cities don't set it up that way. Nashville is set up that way. So it could be set up different ways, but most of them are set up to be just reviewed by staff.
And I'll say I can understand. I think just kind of not to focus too much on the whole District 2 Arapahoe Acres thing, because that's obviously just going to happen anywhere. But I understand what the concerns are absolutely in that area. That's kind of this little pocket a community that hasn't changed. It's all this, special homes. It was a special district. It's developed by a special architect. So I can understand what the neighborhood there is probably trying to accomplish. But I don't know. It's kind of interesting here. So before I guess I continue too much, Melinda, do you want to voice in on this?
Yes, please. We seem to have forgotten, Arapahoe Acres is already designated as a historic district by the state. And
They are, but that doesn't offer any protections locally.
it does, because our ordinance says that anything designated by the state or the federal government, we consider to be an Inglewood landmark also.
Right, but someone would have to bring an application forward to designate it locally. And that's one of the criteria for review by the Historic Preservation Commission and City Council. And we've actually researched this whole thing, and we've never found an application, local application submitted for Arapahoe Acres. The only things that we can find on file are the Scarrett House, the Inglewood Depot, and there's one other property, but no districts. Arapahoe Acres was talked about.
The Brown House. I think it's the Brown House off the target.
Maybe. The Arapahoe Acres was talked about at the Planning and Zoning Commission and Council meetings when they were adopting historic preservation overlay or historic preservation standards in 1999 and 98 in that time frame. It was mentioned, but we went back through all of the historic records and could not find an application going forward for a local designation for them.
Arapahoe Acres does, however, have the protection of the state's designation.
Which that only offers protection if you've taken tax dollars or you've gotten any kind of grant funding. Otherwise, state and national designation does not protect the structure from being torn down at all. Only if you've taken money from the state or the national federal government will it provide protections. But if you have not taken money, yeah, somebody could go knock a structure down. And I think that's one of the items that this group has discussed in wanting a district like this is, well, it wouldn't prevent somebody from tearing something down. It would require them, if they tore it down, to make it look very similar to everything that's there in the neighborhood. And so that's their other half of their discussion is it would still let people tear things down. But to rebuild, you have to build it similar to what's there, whatever standards you set.
Whereas ours is kind of the other way around the tree, where our ordinance prevents people from tearing things down. But if they're allowed to tear it down, it doesn't change what they're allowed to put up. It doesn't affect what they're allowed to put up.
The only thing it would do is if say, and I've dealt with this in other cities where they had a district designated and they had fired, like a historic property, like one of the contributing structures got fired, it could then affect the district overall from a state and federal level because one of those homes has been torn down. But I don't know how the state and federal government go back and re-review designated districts after the fact. From a local's perspective, that structure is gone if it was demolished, by an act of God or something. It's gone, and then they just can build back whatever meets our district standards.
Interesting. Melinda, do you have any other questions or points on maybe specific to the questions that were prompted in the documentation?
Well, I couldn't see any of the presentations, so I'm just going by what Brian showed in the city council meeting. I'm training a new computer and I can't see anything on it.
Well, I can read them to you if you'd like. Would that be helpful?
Well, if I get my voice back, I'm actually trying to sign in on my old computer and then maybe I can see some stuff. No, although I do believe there are people in Arapahoe County or Arapahoe Acres who have, oh look,
There it is. I don't know why that didn't stay on before.
There you go. So those were the questions.
Yeah. um, there are people in Arapahoe Acres who have received funding or tax breaks from the state because of their historic district. And they actually got 65% of their residents to agree to this. And I think that's pretty good.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add?
Not that I can think of at this moment.
Right. So I think, Eric, you were kind of going down the list as we were all talking, kind of making a few little points and notes on that. Would you, I've been kind of putting you on the spot here, we didn't talk about this ahead of time, would you kind of go back over that again so we can kind of remind ourselves of the different kind of points that were discussed here with this, and maybe kind of formulate a summary that we can go forward with?
Sure. So basically, overall, kind of what I'm taking away is that the threshold for this should be high for approval. That we should include a requirement for neighborhood meetings. And that we haven't really talked about appropriate or inappropriate design review authorities yet. In passing. A lot of communities that we've seen has this done at the staff level, or language to the effect of the planning manager, planning director, or designee to be the reviewer if a conservation overlay district is in place.
Second round of voting is a good thing. That was the other thing I heard. But what I'm gathering overall is, again, a little bit of hesitancy from this group on the process. Just maybe the process doesn't sound bad, but really, council really needs to think about what criteria they set as the base criteria for this type of district.
Yeah, I mean, I'd maybe jump in on the points here at the minimum. Size requirements, minimum development stuff. I mean, you know, obviously I'm coming at this from a historic preservation standpoint. If you're looking at Arapahoe Acres, obviously the intent there would be to maintain the scale of the neighborhood in that particular case. So I think you kind of look at this and you go, I guess what's the point of having the overlay if there isn't some level of restriction to that point, right? I mean, this is, I guess that's what could be good or bad about this is it could be very, you know, broad reaching with the, you know, abilities and the restrictions associated with this. But, you know, from that other standpoint, it's like if somebody's going to do this, they're obviously, I would imagine the folks in Arapahoe Acres are doing this to try to protect the scale of their neighborhood, prevent, you know, buildings from effectively getting torn down, would be my guess. And I think that anybody, you know, in any of the other neighborhoods doing this, probably that's maybe one of the things on their list is to prevent the different scale of the neighborhood. And so I would imagine that using your example from earlier, you don't want to have it used as a way for, you know, the inverse to happen. But I would imagine that, you know, at least from my personal perspective, it would be interesting to kind of keep the same property there. So if somebody tears down an Arapahoe Acres house that's, you know, kind of lower and 1 story or 1.5 stories, that something of that same nature would be put back there.
And I would imagine that's true as well. I mean, I guess I'm just a little confused, I guess, about why they wouldn't go through the historic district designation. Yeah. And so I think something for council to think about is, you know, how these two interact with one another, right? And so if, for instance, they used this law or this process to designate an area, you know, but one specific property came through historic preservation, like landmark designation or whatever, like how, do those two things conflict? And then which supersedes which one, right?
Good point.
I mean, there's a possibility that
This is crazy, right?
yeah. What would happen if this overlay was passed and then the historic district was passed?
I have no idea.
Because I mean, that area, I mean, like I said, we shouldn't be focusing on just one area there. But in that particular context, though, that could be a really interesting problem.
Mhm. I mean, generally when you're looking at city laws, the strictest requirements always apply when you're filtering down federal to state to local levels, but even in our own laws, we would generally apply whatever the strictest standard was. So they had an overlay district that then later on they adopted a historic district, likely be, the historic district approval route to get a permit, but we'd also have to kind of blend in whatever is adopted in that overlay. It would be a very interesting thing to see. I'll say that.
So then we go back to what Sam said, like, are we just getting too complex for like our own good? Like,
What I will tell people, we had an interview for our long range planner position today, and I told them the same thing. Eaglewood is a small city. We have big city problems. We're just south of downtown Denver. A lot of time is people don't realize where they're at because they don't always necessarily know that Yale. We pretty typically start with Yale and on down. So we'll have people that have moved into our city that are like, well, Denver let me do this. What about y'all? Well, that's where the impetus for changes in home occupations came from, is things that the city of Denver allows. We tried to do some similar stuff. The impetus for the non-conforming uses in residential districts actually came out of Tacoma, Washington. Having to go out and look for ways to fix these problems, to work on these problems. Because, we are getting more complex. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. For Englewood, when you're looking at a city that's looking at almost everything we do is redevelopment, is tearing something down and building something new, it gets complicated real fast. If we were a city that had hundreds and hundreds of acres already annexed in of greenfield sites, life would be pretty easy. That's just not who we are. And we're almost no greenfield. So any development we see generally is associated with somebody tearing something down, building something.
And also,
Yeah, and we seem to be getting run over roughshod by the Planning and Zoning Commission because they don't really care about historic preservation. My opinion.
So I think to Ken's point here too, I wonder if they're not going the route because the kind of an opinion of like going our route with the historic preservation overlay because they think that this is something that's different, right? I mean, I don't know. It's almost like a visual issue here where people, perceive maybe our ordinance or our group is too restricted. But I'm looking at this, idea here and thinking that this could be far more restrictive than what we've come up with.
Yeah, it seems like you can come up with anything you want.
Yeah. I don't know.
It could. I mean, it has the potential to be really complicated. It also has the potential to be really easy. I mean, I think there's another mid-century modern neighborhood in Denver called Prasanna Park that they've kind of mirrored their discussion around. And it really, I think the only things that I can remember out of it is it limited structure heights to 1.5 stories. And then allowed for fences to be in front of the structure because they created these, the way that homes were built. Sorry, I was at their first neighborhood meeting just to watch. And they were talking about this, but they used their internal and external space to create these like outdoor rooms with their fences. So like our code wouldn't allow a 6-foot fence in front of your front building line. That neighborhood does have 6-foot tall fences in front of a lot of their building lines. So it was doing things that wouldn't necessarily be allowed, but aren't like, yeah, you could build a 50-foot tall home in this neighborhood. No, it wouldn't allow for things like that. Trying to do some districts, some groups did very little. Others complicate things and make it really difficult. But
So I guess going down the list here, yeah, I mean, and also to Sam's point, I think it'd be great if we were part of the process. That'd be really cool. At least, I might even throw in there maybe an idea too, and this is up for discussion, but, 65%, I think is what our vote is.
Yep.
Maybe if we propose maybe a higher vote for this, for the preservation of it.
Yeah, I think preservation seems more appealing.
Yeah, but I mean, also from the standpoint that it's kind of a known quantity of what the preservation, the district preservation is, where it could be maybe not a known quantity of what this neighborhood preservation play is, or conservation play. So maybe to that point, it's not as much as that, right? Of course, I'd love to see somebody do a little bit more historic preservation in the city. I don't know, any other points on this? Any other topics? I mean, we all jump in and say neighborhood meetings are really important. It's important to hear what people have to say about it. Important to make sure that those are, public and available. It's well communicated, maybe guidelines around communication to make sure that, people are well aware. That seems to be always a problem. People just, I didn't know this was happening. And, to your point, the weighted input side of it, I don't know how you address that.
Yeah, maybe it's just with the petition and then a follow-up vote at the end.
Great thing about, like I was saying, the great thing about public meetings is that everybody, it's both the good and bad. Everybody has an opinion. But when you're looking at it in this context, you have to kind of, I don't know, then maybe that's not for us to solve.
yeah, I think that generally lies on the shoulders of the council. Whoever's weighing decisions at a public hearing on, how much does everybody's input, like what all does it all mean when it comes in? So they have the very difficult jobs of weighing all that input, these processes.
Yeah, I think that comes out in multiple meetings.
Oh, yeah.
It certainly does.
Who can initiate the request? I would imagine somebody within the area only. That would be my thought.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Minimum size requirements, minimum development standards. I would maybe flip that around the other way and maybe look at it from a maximum perspective. So trying to match the scale of what was there, we might take. Everybody think that's?
Yeah, and I think matching the scale is awkward words, not saying like 1 story, because you could have an 8-foot story height versus like a 12 or 13.
Talk about meetings. Meetings are important. It's important. What are appropriate or inappropriate design review authorities? I.e., is that us, as in who gets to review the design, or?
Yeah, essentially it would say if a district is adopted, what route would someone go to get a building permit reviewed? So for a historic district or structure, it's come to you first before they come to us to submit for a building permit, or we catch them when they submit for a building permit, and then we have it come to you. We would never approve the building permit until it's approved it. So same thing is it appropriate for, is it appropriate to just determine upfront? Every district will go through the same process of just building permit review with staff, or just planning and zoning commission, just HPC. Like how do we set that bar, or do you make it different for every district? Because some districts may want more input, some may not. So I think that's kind of where it is. The questions here, we're saying, what do you think is appropriate for most of it is, or is it even appropriate?
Yeah.
So,
I think just because we have a large percentage of the code already for historic preservation, it'd be appropriate for us to maybe have an opinion on this too. And, yeah, I guess that's about it, huh?
so when y'all say part of the process, you would say part of the process towards the end, do you think, like maybe in the design review process, do you think that this group should have part of the process in the iterative parts? Like if a group is going for an overlay district, should this group have to weigh in on like whether, should you be able to provide your recommendation for that change? So like if somebody's saying, we'll say, I'm gonna pick on a different neighborhood,
Baker neighborhood.
there we go. Yeah, and so they have the 90 square foot porches. That's their one item. They want to ensure that everybody has this 90 square foot front porch. And it needs to go through the overlay district process if it's created. Would this board or commission like a recommending voice? And yes, this is an appropriate thing to do because they don't meet historic designation guidelines. Like, do you want to be part of that process, or would you rather just be part of the review process when somebody's coming to get a building? Like, how into the weeds does this group want to get, or would like to get? This is all aspirational because council's going to end up setting the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we catch it early, we can convince them to do historic preservation.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking too. I mean,
You want it back.
Yeah.
I think that it seems like it would be appropriate, right? I mean, especially because these two things are so similar. One, like, I keep wondering, like, what would be the benefit of one over the other? And certainly, the more similar we make those processes, I feel like that would incentivize folks to, really leverage this as a tool when it's appropriate.
And then, of course, try to be parallel with the planning and zoning commission. So if they have an official vote that's coming up on an overlay, then maybe us having that same, authority to chime in too.
I think because theirs would be like a rewriting of code. They're required to have a public hearing. Maybe this group could provide a recommendation. We do that with certain types of public hearings where we go to other groups to get recommendations on certain portions of code that maybe affects them a lot more than other things. Like we're working on one with the Board of Adjustment and Appeals right now, where we're going in and getting their input on potentially changing something with STRs. So that could be something that we do is build in a recommendation process, or whether council wants to maybe turn it into a full voting process or something. We can have that discussion with them on where it goes. And then maybe if this process is continued, we'll probably come back to this commission multiple times to discuss any potential code rewrites, see if it aligns with what your goals.
Okay. Any other input on anything?
Yeah, I would see what it comes out of.
Yeah.
What you can produce up. See. It in writing.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we're done with that topic.
So just a heads up, we have our study session, our follow-up study session with City Council on March 9th. And then we're going to ask them to give us direction on what steps they would like to take next. So.
What time is that then?
They normally start at 6. Study sessions start at 6. We don't know what time our item would be, but I think the night is a study session night. not a regular session night. So we kind of run the gamut of 6 to, I think last week their study session was about 11 o'clock. It was a pretty late one. So, but we can always send you guys the agenda once it gets published.
Well, I guess we're moving on to, comparison of conservation overlays and historic districts. I think that's kind of coupled together with the last one, so we don't need to talk about that separately. Okay. Then we're moving on to staff's choice.
I don't have anything.
Commissioner's choice. Anybody want to start?
I can go. Last week I attended the Saving Places Conference. Thank you very much for getting that set up, Eric. It was very interesting. Learned about tax credits and of course, state historical fund grants. And then there was this whole conversation at the plenary about SHPO design standards. And, there's a lot of conversation around the fact that many of them are outdated and whether or not they should be more adaptive or more community-centric or community-driven. I think the biggest takeaway for me was I met a bunch of people at other historic preservation commissions around the state, like from Loveland and Leadville, and I was talking to them about the fact that, our ordinance has been passed for, 2 years now. We still haven't seen an application yet. And one of them suggested that we do some sort of like open house kind of thing, where we, an event where we invited people like from the State Historical Fund to come talk about grants and the tax credits that people could access if their properties were designated as historic properties. And I brought up that we'd done that survey a couple of years ago, I think, and we had sent out postcards, I think, to all those people on that list. But at that time, we weren't a CLG yet, and whether or not it might be interesting to recontact the people on that list now that we are a CLG, and if we organize some kind of an event where like we had speakers who could talk about tax credits and the grants that are available if they were to designate their properties, just kind of package it all so that really get the word out, right? Maybe invite folks from Arapahoe Acres, right? So just something to think about.
I think that message coming from people that are reputable and not on this commission.
We're pretty reputable.
Yes,
What are you
but-
saying, Alex?
But I think they perceive us as biased, or like the ones. that
Sure,
are-
yeah, the professionals. I mean, like,
Yeah.
the talks were really good about, the grants that people could get. I mean, all I could think about was the stupid depot and, man, if they could, these guys were talking about giving out $250,000 grants. Like, certainly the depot folks, which is a nonprofit, could apply and get a grant.
I think they
if that's
have.
what's holding them
I
up.
think they had some.
They have
Oh,
received
shoot.
some money. State Historical Fund, I think, gave them some money.
Yeah.
But
But like, so what, just the question of like, what more can we do to like get the word out about what's available, right?
It's a good idea.
cool. Jim, do you have anything?
Nothing to
Aaron?
Nothing from me.
Melinda? Melinda, do you have anything?
No, nothing.
All right. Okay, so there's a historic lecture next week. And I am looking for the information on that right now. Is that right? It is Trappers and Traders, Part 3. So I don't know how many people knew Don Roth here. You knew Don, right? Unfortunately, he passed away. right before the first part of the year, but he was scheduled to do a lecture for Historic Englewood for the third part of that lecture. He recorded it, and but then unfortunately passed away before he presented. So we're still going to present it in honor of him, considering it was recorded. So that'll be next week, Tuesday, February 24th. There'll be one at 2:30 p.m. at the Englewood Library, and there'll be one at 6:30 p.m. just right across over in the corner over there at our City Spark space. And Don, the presentations are, there's so much information in them. I don't know, Jim, have you seen? You saw one of them, I think.
Yeah, I've seen one or two.
Yeah, and there's a whole lot of information. It's just amazing to talk about him because you hear these names that he's researched that, come up that counties are named after and areas of the state are named after. It's really kind of a cool presentation. So
He always had history going back 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Over that, when I first met stuff.
Yeah.
I was like, oh.
yeah. So 2:30 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. on February 24th, Tuesday. So 2:30 at the library and 6:30 over here. And lecture will be about 45 minutes. So if you're interested in coming, it's free. So that's all I have.
Okay.
Moving on would be adjournment.
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
Oh, Melinda, you didn't have anything? Sorry, I think I forgot if I asked you or not.
No, I don't have anything.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure. Sorry. Okay, adjournment.
We have a motion.
Motion adjourned.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Meeting adjourned at 7:55. Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Melinda.
Bye.
Glad you had fun at the conference.
Yeah, it was really
That's,
cool.
what time did you say that? Okay, on Monday.
Tuesday, February